DOJ's cuts to Social Security. They're also aiming to put pressure on their Republican colleagues.
We all need to stand up and get rid of Elon Musk and tell Donald Trump to keep his hands off our Social Security.
It was the third rail. But boy, they are grabbing it with both hands, aren't they?
We will use this war room as an opportunity to focus the energy around saving our Social Security.
Let's bring in NBC's Julie Sirkin, who's on the Hill for us. Also with me, Julie Roginski, a Democratic strategist and the author of the Salty Politics letter on Substack. Okay, Julie Sirkin, because I have to use both names. We have two Julies here. What is it specifically that the Democrats hope they can achieve with this war room?
Well, they're doing all they can, Chris, in the minority, which is message, to go on offensive, to try and be loud about this issue. And so the group of Democrats, you heard from some of them, including Brian Schatz of Hawaii, Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, also Mark Kelly of Arizona, and Ron Wyden of Oregon, are coming together to sort of lead this war room to try and push back against the Trump administration's efforts on DOJ's policies to slash offices that we've seen in the last couple of weeks, to cut offices and close offices around the country, to limit the way in which seniors who are entitled to these benefits can actually get somebody on the phone and talk to somebody about problems they may be having or registering for these benefits. And so this is Democrats' organized push to basically push back on those efforts from the administration. Take a listen to a little bit more of what Warren had to say on this.
The war room is about getting that effort organized. It is about oversight. It is about having a place to bring the stories so we can have all of the American people privy to what we hear, that you may not be able to afford rent, that you may not be able to afford food.
Now, Democrats are smartly capitalizing on an issue that is overwhelmingly popular and important for all Americans, no matter which party they're in, Republican or Democrat. Seniors are, of course, entitled to these benefits. They rely on these benefits, and has always been a very unpopular thing to touch, even though the entity does need some reforming to do. And so Democrats are going to capitalize on this. They're going to go out to those town halls that we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks to really try to own in on the one issue that they know, no matter what, is not going to be popular with the American people, and that is cutting into Social Security, Chris.
Julie Sirkin, thank you for that. Okay, Julie Roginski. Democrats, again, you know, as they say, this is about both messaging and oversight. But being in the minority, as she points out, makes oversight, shall we say, tough. Is this a good way to draw attention to an issue we know matters to folks?
Well, they should be drawing attention to it. You know, where I come from, as a messaging person in the Democratic Party, I think it's more effective to show and not tell. So if I were in their shoes, I would have gone to a Social Security office. I would have found seniors who are already struggling with getting through to their Social Security offices, who are being impacted already by these DOJ cuts. And I would have used them as the example of what is happening right now, because it's one thing for a bunch of wealthy senators to stand in the Senate in Washington and talk about this. It's totally different to have them standing alongside regular Americans who are being impacted by these cuts and put faces and names to this devastating policy. It's very, very important that Democrats stand this, because Social Security impacts millions upon millions of Americans who sometimes are Democrats, sometimes are Republicans, sometimes are neither. But nevertheless, all believe very strongly that this is a sacrosanct program that should not be touched. And now you have the world's biggest, richest billionaire cutting their Social Security, cutting their funding in order to get tax breaks for himself and his fellow really rich buddies. And so I think that's a very important message for them to put forward. How they put it forward, however, is the crux here.
Well, let's talk about a specific example. For example, the Trump administration says it's trying to increase efficiency by pushing recipients away from using the phone. They want them to come in person. They want them to use online services. But just yesterday, the main portal for recipients to manage their benefits online had a full outage. So all these people who were trying to do what they were told to do, which was go online, couldn't. Traditional war rooms, and I've been in them. I've been in them on during a debate night. I've been in them during a campaign. They respond instantaneously, in real time, when things happen. They do things geographically in real time when something happens. I don't need to tell you because you're a messaging person, but how could this be used most effectively, and how important is it to live in those real-time moments?
Well, first of all, Democrats and Democratic states should deploy people to these locations should have some sort of number that seniors can call. Listen, my parents are going to, if they're watching, are going to hate me for saying this, but I mean, my parents are in the Social Security cohort. I don't know that they know how to use a computer to go online. And
they're far from alone.
Of course, that's my point. And it's not just them. I mean, this is not a generation necessarily that grew up being online and knows how to navigate that. And so when you're taking away from the very people who are used to going somewhere in person, who are used to making phone calls and telling them, hey, why don't you guys do what we in Silicon Valley do, because I'm Elon Musk and I'm totally committed to my weirdo tech world, to go online and deal with that, a lot of them just won't know how to do it. And a lot of them shouldn't be expected at this stage of their lives to learn how to do it, and nobody's teaching them how to do it. So there are real life examples that are going to be devastated by these policies. And by the way, of course the website's going to go down. It's going to be overwhelmed. Of course people are not going to be able to get through. And instead of making their life more easy and allowing them to use these programs, into which, let's remember, they have paid their entire professional lives, they're basically having this snatched away from them in the most vulnerable time of their lives when they're no longer able to earn a paycheck through work. And so a lot of them. And so I think this is something that Democrats have a golden opportunity to seize upon. But again, I keep saying, as you point out, the right way to do this is using the right message, the right messengers, and not standing not even on the floor of the House, because Cory Booker is doing that right now, but not standing off the floor of the Senate, and as you see on the screen right there, and having this kind of boring press conference about it without having any real life people to show as examples of who's being devastated right now.
Well, let's talk about real life people, because there's a reason that when Ronald Reagan, I think he was the first president, certainly in the television era, to put members of the public in the audience during a State of the Union. There's a reason they still do that. Democrats, Republicans still do that, to bring home a message that people can relate to. So I'm curious about your point, deploying people to different states. You said Democratic states. I wonder if it needs to be just Democratic states, because if you have a place that people can call in, not only can you show Democrats will be responsive, right? But you may also get examples of people who may be willing to talk about their own experience in a way that you can amplify.
Well, of course. And by Democratic states, I mean that Democratic governors have the money in the budget to be able to allocate resources to this in a way that Republican governors will never want to insult Elon Musk by doing. Although I wish they would, because it's their constituents who are suffering.
But is this super expensive, something the DNC couldn't fund? Or a local state party
couldn't
fund?
There are a lot of things that the DNC and the local state party could fund that they don't fund. This is something that I would think they should take a look at, especially with the new DNC chair. Maybe time, Mr. Chairman, to think outside the box on some of these things. But I think more importantly, what's so important is to have faces, as we talked about before, to these stories. And if we all remember Joe the plumber back in the Romney campaign, Romney didn't win, but we all still remember 20 years later, however many years it's been, Joe the plumber, right? Or McCain, I can't even remember whose campaign that was. But we remember these people because we remember their faces, we remember their stories, we remember their monikers. And that happens over and over and over again. And so I would strongly urge my Democratic friends in the Senate and in the House who want to be part of this war room to take it outside of Washington and to focus on people in Michigan, to focus on people in Florida, to focus on people in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, who are going to suffer and not be able to make ends meet at a time when inflation is going through the roof. Any savings that they've had in the stock market, their 401ks are going down. And this is yet one more thing that's going to make their lives completely unaffordable. And this is the commitment that we're making to our seniors that we are ripping away from them. And that's something that really needs to be accentuated on a personal level where paces are put to these stories.
Julie Roginski, thank you.
Thank you.
And still to come, why Harvard is under review.